Thank you very much, Professor Bazerman. It was
Thank you.
an amazing learning experience for us. Also to have you in Madrid and in the foundation for the first time, it's a honor. It's a honor, and
Thank you.
And we are very welcoming people in general in Spain. So we hope that you come back very soon. And this is a place of freedom. Similarly to the United States, Spain is a place of freedom. So what we did is we provided a QR to our audience to send whatever questions they have. And I have grouped them in several types of questions. Trump is in many of them.
I experienced that this morning as well. Yeah.
I also wanted to say that I liked a lot your conference. I said one part, you said that teaching negotiations was easy.
It is.
See, but I have some of my students are
Yeah,
here.
I'm sorry about that. But, yeah.
Don't tell the trick.
Yeah.
Well, it is definitely an exciting skill that the world needs. Mm-hmm. And if you want, we can start with the general context that we are experiencing. All what would you call in your book? The context is changing, and that has an effect on the basics, foundations that still prevail, but somehow they are modified by the context. So we see that we have a lot of challenges in the world, and here I take some of the audience questions regarding inequality, things like lack of resources or scarcity, interdependence of the different countries. All of that was solved in the past with reciprocity and creating sort of networks of countries, networks of people, connections. But it seems like these traditional methods of doing politics in a softer, probably power way, it's pivoting into more hard way of doing politics. What's going on? How can we explain this?
I think that there's lots of things in society that are making negotiations more focused on sort of beating the other side. So whether we think about Trump's tariff or trade policies, or we think about the bifurcation of the economy, the polarization of the economy. As soon as we think about divides, we think about power. And when we think about power, we think who gets how much. And we lose the idea of how do we create more value. I think of my executive students, and I teach lots of executive students who are very successful in life, and they show up for a negotiation course, and on day 2, we have a simulation where the key to success is making trade-offs across issues. For one party to win on the issue they care about, while the other side wins on the issue that they care more about, and they create more joint gain. And I run into lots of senior executives who have just had a mythical fixed pie in their mind all their life, and they sort of are stunned by the fact that there's good evidence that, in fact, that the size of the pie can be enhanced. And I think that a lot of the economic factors that are going on sort of play into this mythical fixed pie. So the economist Ricardo talked about the law of comparative advantage and argues that one of the bases of trade is that some countries can make some products or services more effectively and other countries can make other products and services more effectively. It doesn't make sense for all countries to make all the products that they need when we can do better by trading the stuff I can make well for the stuff that you can make well, and create more value for all of us. Free trade policies are very helpful for helping the world create value. And it used to be in the United States that the Republicans or right-leaning party sort of believed in free trade, and the Democrats or the left-leaning party trying to protect the unions who had specific jobs in the United States were more against trade. Today we see a very strange flip. So there are still traditional Republicans in the US who are enthusiasts for free trade, but Donald Trump, who's part of the Republican Party and is now at kind of the core of the Republican Party, is the least free trade president we've seen in contemporary history, and that's destroying lots of opportunities to create value by wise trade agreements.
So some other Trump's questions are regarding his negotiation skills.
Yeah.
Do you think that he's a good negotiator, or besides the intention, or I'm not going to get into politics or of the measures, as a negotiator, do you think he's a good negotiator?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to answer you as a negotiation professor as opposed to somebody who did not vote for Donald Trump. So I can't claim to be unbiased, but then again, I don't think any of us can. But my goal isn't to make a political comment. It's to answer your question as clearly as possible. You know, we can pick the dimension to evaluate Trump's negotiation policy. So if you ask Trump, are you effective? He'd say, I'm enormously effective, and he would talk about the billions of dollars that have been raised by collecting tariffs on the imports of countries who have been abusing their relationship with the United States for years. So one measure, okay, tariffs collected by the US government is way up, although there are now court challenges, but let's assume that the US keeps a good chunk of these tariffs. That's a measure that there's been some economic gain. The problem is that the cost to American consumers has gone up significantly. The goods simply cost more once you add the tariff. So it's not entirely clear whether Spanish olive oil, whether the producers in Spain are paying it or whether the consumers on the American end are paying it. So there's a kind of a loss there. The other loss is sort of just a destruction of the trade systems across countries, which Ricardo, a very long time ago, and I'm kind of endorsing, free trade is good for creating value in the world, and that's being missed. The other thing that the United States is going to need to reckon with is the nature of its relationships with people who used to be their close friends. I see in the newspaper in the last 48 hours that there seems to be some tension between Trump and Sanchez on a number of fronts. But we can look at physically closer relationships. So Canada I find to be a fascinating example. You know, Americans have historically loved Canadians. They're a lot like Americans, only nicer. So we have positive regard toward Canadians. Canadians aren't feeling really good about the U.S. Marla and I spent some time in Toronto, and when we go to the main liquor store is the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. And the truth is we do like Cabernets from Napa Valley in the U.S., but if you go to the Liquor Control Board of Ontario wine store, there are no American Cabernets. In fact, there's no American wine. There are simply signs making fun of America and guiding you to the wine that you can buy instead of buying American wines in the store. Okay? Well, there's something wrong with the relationship. But if you wanted a bigger signal that there's something wrong with the relationship, you know, if we go back to a long time ago, to 2024, Canada and China did not get along particularly well. And now what Trump has done is he's improved Canadian-Chinese trade relationships by a significant degree. And even after Trump is gone, okay, at that time, Canada's going to have some new trading partners. And are we going to get our relationship back with Canada? I think the hostility will go away at some point, but I think that there will be some very long-term losses as a result of his strategy. So I think you need to pick the dimension. Is the U.S. collecting tariff money? Yes. Do I think it's a long-term wise strategy for the U.S.? Well, we're saying no, and it's an embarrassment to me as an American negotiation professor.
Thank you. Let's move into another block of questions regarding technology. You talked about the digital way of as a mean of negotiating the channel. But we have some questions regarding artificial intelligence. Here we have one. For instance, Alberto Blasco, in an era of artificial intelligence and data-driven decision-making, do you believe algorithms and AI tools will eventually play meaningful roles in negotiations or even substitute it? Or will human judgment and ultimate decisions still remain forever?
Yeah, so I think we know the answer to this one. Artificial intelligence is already playing a significant role. It's going to grow, and those of us who would like a more human-centric approach, well, we should get over it because the world's going to change whether we like it or not. So I'm 70 years old, and I have no plans of becoming an expert at artificial intelligence. On the other hand, I've spent my career being really good at surrounding myself with younger, smarter, more up-to-date scholars who can inform me about lots of dimensions. So my colleague Deepak Malhotra, who I wrote Negotiation Genius with, and a colleague named Amit Goldenberg, who is an artificial intelligence expert, they provide me with a lot of coaching that I need. So in my executive education offerings that I coordinate, and they're part of the teaching team that delivers the program, we're incorporating what they know about artificial intelligence. By next year, when I'm teaching MBAs in the 25-26 academic year, I fully expect to sort of have borrowed their expertise to incorporate it to a significant degree. So I'll just give you some examples. I've done a lot of work in the insurance industry. I work with a company based in Ottawa, Canada, called Slice Insurance. Slice Insurance is all about moving the insurance business online, not just selling you a policy, but everything from selling you a policy to when you when you submit a claim for an AI bot to basically negotiate the resolution to the claim. And the argument for the bot is that it can incorporate data about what a claim is worth far faster than a human, can do it more accurately than a human. It can also detect fraud better than a human can. And with a bot handling your claim, if it's a simple, obviously legitimate claim, your money can be in your bank account in a matter of seconds rather than months if you're dealing with a human in a 22-story building who's reviewing it and checking with their boss. So there's a lot of things that we can that a bot can learn to do better. We can also identify the cases where we don't want to trust artificial intelligence for some reason and figure out how to incorporate humans. Humans are going to be necessary to figure out how to set up the bot. Okay? Humans are necessary for telling the bot, what are we trying to accomplish? Before you optimize it, I need to tell you what's important. So sort of, if your goal is to not pay claims, which some insurance companies have been accused of, you don't need an artificial intelligence agent to do it. You could just delay paying claims forever and ever and ever. But that's probably not a particularly wise strategy. If your goal is to keep customers extraordinarily happy, you can overpay claims, maintain relationships, but you're paying too much out in claims. If you're trying to figure out what claims should be paid quickly and which ones need more attention, I think that now we're into a world where artificial agents can be shockingly helpful. My colleague Amit Goldenberg, who I mentioned a minute ago, he runs an activity in his negotiation class, which I'm working hard so they'll be sophisticated enough to teach this next year. But what he does is he has students negotiate a particular simulation between a buyer and a seller. And after they're done, so they kind of know what the story looks like, the next task is to have the students write an instruction to a bot, telling the bot what they're trying to accomplish in the negotiation. So basically, you can imagine turning the negotiation over to a bot. Now, what you tell the bot is going to be critically important in terms of what they do. So the bot gets to read the case, the bot gets the instruction of what their job is, and then Amit has all the bots play against each other in a round-robin competition. And he reports back to the students not so much who did well, but what are the characteristics of the instructions that are given to the bot that maximizes performance. Okay? So we can now see, again, the human isn't going away. The human is simply giving over the part of the task to the bot that the bot can do better. But the human has to specify, what are we trying to accomplish? What do I want you to emphasize? What's the goal that the bot should have? But with technology today, yes, bots can outperform human beings.
Great. Let's move to the third block, because negotiation is so rich. It touches psychological aspects, it touches ethical aspects, economical aspects, game theory and decision making that you have researched a lot, cognitive bias that we have also. I would like to open now a block on that. It has to do with philosophy, what is fair, what is not fair. So being a simple and easy probably discipline to teach because it's fun and people enjoy it a lot, the reality is one of the most complex abilities given how many dimensions, holistic dimensions it contains. And you have researched a lot on cognitive bias. You came to the understanding that we are our reasoning is not perfect, and we are fully loaded with a lot of bias. And I have several questions regarding this. For instance, Alfonso Calabia in the audience says, in your book, The Game Has Changed, which, congratulations, because today is the first day it's published in Spanish. So,
thank you.
So this is 400 million people that are going to be able now to read in their native language.
Even 10% would be good.
That would be good, right? So you highlight the role of cognitive bias in negotiation. You are probably the pioneer, together with Margaret Neal, back in the past, when you were teaching at MIT. Which bias do you believe is currently the most dangerous in business and political negotiations?
Yeah, so some of you may know the work of Kahneman and Tversky, or Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And a lot of particularly my early work was in many ways bringing the idea that people are it's not just that people aren't perfect, it's that we're biased in systematic and predictable ways. And a lot of my work and a number of my colleagues really brought that idea to the topic of negotiation. And I think there's a long list, but you asked for one, so I'll give you two. Right. Okay. So and to put this into context, if we have any medical doctors here, you're probably annoyed by people who ask you for medical advice when you run into them at a cocktail party. Well, my version of this is at a cocktail party, people basically want me to reduce my 40 years of work to the answer to that question. Okay. Okay. Now, but which means I've had practice doing that, right? So, so I'm going to share with the whole audience my two answers. One, negotiators don't think enough about the decisions of other parties. Okay? Independent of whether you want to be a nicer human being or not. It'd be good to be a nicer human being. But independent of that, there's so much strategic information to be gained by thinking about the perspective of the other side. And we tend to not do that. Many of us have heard the phrase, put yourself in the shoes of others. It's a good idea. It's just that we don't tend to do it. We tend to approach negotiations from what we want rather than thinking, what do I need to understand about what they want in order to actually get a deal done? So spending lots more time thinking about the decisions of others is important. So I would call that bias a failure to think about the decisions of others. And then the other one, which we've touched on, is the mythical fixed pie of negotiation. Okay, some people say, so do you agree with the view that the pie is fixed or it's not fixed? And my answer is, it's a fact that there are many, many negotiations where the pie isn't fixed. If I'm going to sell you my car and you're going to give me money, then that's pretty fixed. The more money you pay me, the better off I am, the worse off you are. But as soon as we're in a normal business negotiation, even if it's as simple as you're hiring a student who's graduating from an MBA program, and you're going to offer them a salary, and you're going to offer them a bonus, and you're going to specify how many weeks of vacation a year they receive. You're going to provide them with a title. You're going to discuss who are they going to report to in the organization. You're going to discuss what projects they're going to work on early in their career. There's a whole bunch of things going on here. Well, it turns out that the employer and the student don't weight these topics equally. Some things are more important to one side in the negotiation, and realizing that the pie isn't fixed, and realizing that we make widgets better and you make idiots better, and we can trade, okay, that's where value comes from. And when we have a mythical fixed pie, we lose the opportunity to create value. So my answers were failure to think about the decisions of others and assuming a mythical fixed pie.
Thank you for the straightforward answers. And we will have at the end of the discussion, I would like to go through some suggestions, last-minute suggestions. So I tell you just to book some 3 or 4 final suggestions for the audience to negotiate tomorrow. But before we go into that, I'd like to open the chapter on culture. Negotiation teaching has been predominantly grounded in the Anglo-Saxon world. Postgraduate studies in the United States, the industrialization was primarily happening in the Anglo-Saxon world, but now we have some questions regarding the pivoting into other superpowers like China, which have a different way of doing business and different cultural values and attributes. So Estelio Sousa is asking, how do you think the rapid growth of China as a global superpower is impacting negotiations as a way of doing business nowadays?
Yeah. So there are undoubtedly cultural differences. There's different styles. There's things that we want to understand about people's behavior. We want to understand sort of New York bluntness doesn't mean that they don't like you. Okay, it's a style of behavior. We want to be aware of that. We also want to realize that, so in the US, I think we have about 300 million people. Americans are kind of aware that not all 300 million of them are the same, that there are differences. Psychologists talk about in-group heterogeneity, in-group variance, out-group homogeneity. We treat people from other groups as if they're the same. So we assume a stereotype about them. And and lots of people can tell you stories about what they ran into in those countries. I'm not doubting their experience. But what I will predict is that when you assume that all Italians are the same, if you talk to Italians, they will tell you, no, Italians vary to a significant degree. So to begin with, I would say that you want to learn about culture if you're negotiating in a different culture. Okay? On the other hand, you don't want to assume that you're negotiating with a stereotype from that culture. You want to use the early parts of a negotiation to learn about the specific person, the specific company with whom you're negotiating. And I think that that's how we want to use any demographic information. We don't want to ignore it, but we don't want to assume that it's a perfect description either. Now, the question mentioned China. And I'm old enough that the country has changed. Mm-hmm. So many of you will remember, if we go back to the 1980s, the question wasn't China, it was Japan. Mm-hmm. So Japan had a booming economy, they were picking up market share, and everyone wanted to know, how do you negotiate with the Japanese? And there was definitely this aura that they're fundamentally different. And I would say, turns out that people in Japan vary. There's cultural differences, there's norms of politeness, there's norms of formality that are all different. We want to understand that. But what people were really referring to is Japan had power in the 1980s, and they could drive a harder bargain. Today, China's in a kind of a phenomenal position. They've been through kind of phenomenal growth, and all of a sudden, there's a bunch of people who want to increase their trading with them because of reasons that we've already talked about this evening. So we want to understand the actual context. Is it a style of behavior? To some degree, but it's also that China has economic power that they didn't have before. They have more economic power in 2025 than they did in 2024 because a lot of countries like Canada are knocking on their door saying, we'd like to talk to you.
And narrow to culture, I would like to talk about gender-specific issues. You told me before, when we were before coming, that your best students are women. And we come from a probably male-dominant way of doing business, which is changing and pivoting, thankfully, into a much more rich. How do you approach negotiation? And your wife is in front of us, how do you really perceive gender-specific differences? And how do you, in your teachings and your classes, how do you approach this topic?
Sure. So let me give you some kind of statistical facts. And you already mentioned a lot of our research comes out of an American context. So I'm going to be guilty on this, but I'm going to bet that this is true in Spain as well.
That's true.
But I can't show you the data. So in an American context, I'll give you two empirical results. Women are more cooperative than men. Men are more competitive than women. Okay? If we think about this in terms of being good at creating value, women are better at creating value than men. If we think about claiming value, men are better than women at claiming value. So easy to identify empirical research that supports what I just said. A problem, and I don't mean to insult any journalists here, but the problem is that when we read a newspaper article that has 600 words, we often get the image, there's a title, Women Are from Venus and Men Are from Mars, or something like that. I forget the exact title. But we get the impression that we're talking about two different species in terms of how they negotiate. If you go back to the studies that the data came from, what you typically see are two overlapping distributions. Is there a mean difference on cooperativeness? Yes, there is. But you wouldn't want to take one male and one female and predict which one's going to definitively do better based on having the gender information alone, because those individuals are coming out of draws of the distribution. And so it's important to understand the variation in the two groups rather than just focus on that relatively small mean difference. So it's a little bit like the culture across in a different country, It's fine to know this fact. It's a mistake to assume because I'm negotiating with a female, this is what I'm going to expect, and develop my negotiation strategy accordingly, when in fact, I could first talk to them and find out who they are, what do they know, what their interests are, and then adapt my strategy more effectively.
So thank you very much. You're always welcome to come back together with your partner, of course. Very welcome to the foundation and very welcome to Madrid. So thank you very much. Let's give you a big clap.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.